Here we go. Happy Vital Energy Series Wednesday. We are back to back to back with these Wednesdays because of the holiday season. So we will be back next week for our actual final one of the year. Oh my gosh, which is so crazy because we started this months ago. This is number 9, and we are switching it up a little bit. So we switched things up last week when we talked about long-term chronic illness and those mystery diagnoses. Today we are going to do a little bit of the same, of switching it up and talking about something that doesn't just apply in this presentation, but you can really apply this to all the other presentations that we've done. So for most of you that don't know, I do teach an educational series, a course on this. It takes us 5 weeks to go through and really go through the actual physiology of these things. So the Vital Energy series is to give you a taste. And so today, this is actually one of the foundationary topics that I actually teach in that first session, that first week. It's something that is really important to grasp, and I know we've talked a lot about it, so I wanted to differentiate. So let's dive into the repair and rebuild. We're going to talk about healing, but we're specifically going to talk about injury healing and probably a little bit of injury education that you probably have not thought of or thought of it in this way, depending on what your background is. So let's dive in. We're going to go over the biological sequence of an injury. The big, huge, scary thing in the room is always inflammation. So we're going to debunk inflammation today. Look at what happens when we have this old pain that flares. Sometimes it happens seasonally, sometimes it happens during a specific time of the year, or an event, or in some type of track that we step on. We're going to talk about what actually delays healing when it comes to injury, and then spontaneous injury versus conflict-driven injuries, and that's kind of that new light bulb that may go off for you this week. And then when repair falls outside of the 5 biological laws, and that is the one thing that I'm going to drop today that may be like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. And then we're going to talk about how to support that rebuilding phase. So as always, this is simply just for education. I am not a medical doctor. I am a chiropractor, but I'm not anyone's chiropractor here. And so I'm simply just giving you informational pieces that you can utilize to expand your knowledge to make the best sovereign health choices for you and your family, and make sure you're always consulting with those that you trust, foremost as your primary care providers for your health. By no means anything here am I recommending treatment, diagnosis, cures, or any other type of medical condition. So if you don't know me by now, welcome. I am a disruptor, an initiator. I am someone who really just wants to guide you back to the truth, the biological understanding of all of the codes that live inside of your system. And that may be light, that might be frequency, that may be some type of underlying energetic coding that your body is wired with. So I come with a long list of credentials that gave me a lot of opportunity to take what I knew, unlearn it and relearn it and mend it and put it through the 5 biological laws, which is what everything I will ever speak of always goes through. So it is the truth, the foundational law of our body, and let's dive in and go over that rather quickly, because I think most of you, at least on here live tonight, maybe those watching the replay later will have to go back and watch another one, but I want to get into what's more exciting because we've talked about this every single week. Not that it's not important, but the 5 biological laws of nature, in a quick synopsis, are a set of laws discovered by a German medical doctor who was working with his patients and noticed there was some type of pattern or something that showed up that made him go, hmm. And that was, why do all of these individuals having said diagnoses have similar experiences that happened to them prior to the onset of these experiences, or health symptoms, should I say. And so that allowed us the window in, or allowed him the window in, I should say, into explaining how our body adapts, whether you are human, animal, or plant. And we are talking about your psyche, your brain, and your organ system. And so Dr. Palmer gifted us the 5 biological laws through thousands and thousands and thousands of cases of him combing through, and his own personal experience. If you want to learn more about that, you could search, don't search on the Google because we know that Google doesn't give you anything, but I have lots of great websites that are listed on my website that you can also reference as well. Always looking up the foundations of German new medicine in a lens that is not through the propaganda eye, everyone. Come on, we need to leave the propaganda eye. So if you want those resources, I'm happy to give them to you. But there's a lot of really great resources out there that tells about his story. So overall, the biggest thing I want you to get from this is that this is a law. These are not hypotheses. These are not theories. These are laws. And so they exist in your life whether you actually consciously are aware of them or not. And so this entire series that I've been doing that we will continue in the new year, I just launched to some of those on my team exclusively. All the topics that are coming up, we are shifting it massively in the new year and bringing a lot more to the surface, the five biological laws, and through that lens is that you're already attuned. Your body already knows. And so no matter if we put this through Western medicine, allopathic Western medicine, we put it through holistic medicine, we put it through Eastern medicine, it doesn't matter because at the surface, the foundation, we all have this walking in our biology. Our biology exists as such, and we then apply different definitions of medicine to this on the surface. And that allows us tonight to shift our awareness, shift our perspective, to activate our conscious and our subconscious connections of our psyche, our brain, our organ systems, and zip that up and be able to put a brand new key in a lock and unlock something that really is transformational when you allow yourself to be a witness for it. So in the five biological laws of nature, again, like I said, I could teach each one of these laws for hours and hours and hours. But to sum them up for ease of understanding tonight, number one states that every symptom has a meaning. We are not just a pile of brokenness, and our symptoms are these fire alarms that we should just throw water at and guess. Our fire alarm system is not meant to be alarming or fearful. It's actually there in biological necessity, and those symptoms actually mean something. So we are striving to remove ourselves from this fear-based paradigm, saying that fear and symptoms just mean that our body doesn't know what to do and we're trying to figure it out, but we don't understand anything and we're just going to throw a bunch of things and see what sticks. We don't live by that here. We live by the understanding that each symptom is a means of communication to understand a bigger pattern. And what do I mean by pattern? Well, law number two states when we have a conflict, that means when we are experiencing something that was completely unexpected. It was a shock to our body. We couldn't predetermine it to happen. It knocked us off our feet. And we have to have a response to it. So we have this conflict that happens biologically. Our body has to respond. And so that's telling us that when our body has the opportunity to allow us to continue in survival, it has a set of tools in a tool bag that allows us to stay in that response mode. And when we go through this response mode, we are actually looking for a resolution. Because if we are constantly looking for danger because we're trying to resolve, that adds more stress. That doesn't allow us to remove ourselves from that survival mode. It actually keeps us in a depleted state. So our goal in all of this is to find resolution or healing. So law number three, when we find healing, it always follows conflict resolution. It's simple. It's like A plus B equals C. You have a conflict, you find a resolution, you go into healing. And there are two phases to that healing, which we're going to focus on phase A today, especially the inflammatory response phase. And then law number four states that microbes assist in the repair of these phases. So microbes are in that healing phase, that first stage, they are essential keys to unlocking the true healing biologically that our body is trying to do. We've spoke extensively on law number four in gut wisdom, especially even last week when we talked about Epstein-Barr and we talked about Lyme and the chronic loop of autoimmune and these mystery diagnosis that people have in chronic healing loops. And law number five is the quintessential essence that tells us that we are predictable. If we have a conflict, we know we have to find resolution. And when we find resolution, we know that there's going to be symptoms. And when we have those symptoms, we could take those symptoms and see what system they exist in. So for example, just we talked about 8 times in the last 6 months together is if we have eye symptoms, that means there's something going on in terms of an eye program. Eye symptoms don't mean we're having a toe program, and a toe program does not mean it's connected to our kidney. Each system has its own predictable pattern because it has its own organs or organ systems, its own cells, its own little foundations and little houses, if you will, and those live proprietarily in those systems. We don't cross lines, we're not crossing wires. It's not as ambiguous and confusing as a lot of different pathways in different pathways of medicine make it out to be. So, our goal here today is to take these five biological laws and to look at the state of healing, especially healing when it comes to surgical repair or some type of injury. And we'll talk about those classifications of injury. So, that healing in that post-injury phase sometimes and most times, honestly, often feels very slow. It feels like it's not working. It feels like we have a lot of complications that come up during this time. It seems like it should be more simple. And I've heard this in my office for years. Well, I just went and got this surgery and it should be fixed, right? Or I just feel like I injured myself and I should be better by now. I've done all of these things. Why is this not working? And we're going to talk about why it may not be working and why we can shift our perspective to understand that healing is actually not slow. It's necessary. However long your body's taking to heal, if we're not interrupting it, is respective to the state of that conflict or if it's spontaneous injury. We're going to talk about that in and of itself. Your body is not failing if it's perceived to be healing slow. You're following a very precise biological blueprint for repair that your body has written for you. That's my goal here tonight. So this is literally within the first 30 minutes of the course that I teach on the extensiveness of the five biological laws of nature this is rule number one. There are three categories where German New Medicine, Germanische Heilkunde, Germanic healing knowledge, whatever you want to call it, does not actually apply because it's not biological situation. It's not something that the body has to respond to because it's not something that biologically would ever happen in an intelligent system unless there was outside sources making an impact. So again, some symptoms do not originate from a conflict shock because a conflict shock has to fall under certain criteria. And so when they do come from areas that aren't under a conflict shock, they can come from a physical or an environmental cause. And so let's say, for example, you have malnutrition. You don't have enough nutrients. We see this with those who have scurvy or rickets. If you have vitamin deficiencies, that is not a biological program. It's that you don't have enough nutrients in your system to actually repair. And so it's as simple as if I don't have enough vitamin D, I take vitamin D and it's resolved. It's not a biological conflict. And so that is number one. Number two is toxicity. If I am going to drink arsenic or rat poison or dish soap, that's not a biological program. That's toxicity. You are burdening your natural detoxification pathways. This is things like cigarette smoke. This is things like wastewater. This is things like all of the chemicals in our water system. Our body does adapt to it, but it doesn't adapt biologically. It's basically fighting a uphill battle because our body is wired for our survival. And when we're putting chemicals in it or not putting the proper nutrients in our body that our body requires, it has to have proper ingredients for it to be able to function. That is not anything biological. That's a necessity, or a chemical overload when you're talking about toxicity. So those two, of course, don't apply to tonight, but they are noteworthy. But number three is what we're going to talk about. Spontaneous injuries actually don't apply to our biological laws. And you may be thinking, what do you even mean by that? I don't understand. And I'm going to explain that tonight because it's something that most of us don't consider, but there are some caveats that we could look at, and there are some nuances that we really have to ask ourselves, is this actually a spontaneous injury or not? And so we're going to get a little bit philosophical, very much so, very logical tonight as well, but looking at spontaneous injury. So these are things like accidents, falls, sudden impacts. These do not require conflict resolution. You don't have to figure out a way to resolve it because your body's already on the scene. It's intelligent. It's an innate response that your body already is planning to do. And these do require support, repair, and rebuilding, but they don't require any type of conscious or even subconscious. It's literally just an innate program in and of itself outside of the biological laws. For example, um, I opened the door to our bathroom today very quickly to grab the baby, and TMI, sloughed the skin of my toe on my pinky toe completely all the way off because it got stuck under this like solid oak door and just was like zoop. It was literally like I took a cheese grater to it. And it was the most painful thing ever. But there was nothing that I had a conflict on. That was true spontaneous injury. And so what my body did, as soon as the injury happened, it went right to repair. It went right to resolution because it was an emergency. So these are some of the things we're going to talk about in differentiating when we have injuries or where those injuries come from to help us look at the healing phase and how we are whether we're intentionally impacting it, unconsciously impacting it or not. So let's look at these two types of injuries. We have spontaneous injury, like I just shared with you. My lovely right pinky toe is on the struggle bus today, everybody. But it's healing. I don't have to do anything. It's healing. As long as I have the necessary repair ingredients, it's going to heal, right? So that would be accidental things, mechanical things, things that are unexpected, but unexpected without the conflict shock. So this can be anything from falling off a bicycle and breaking an arm. This could be, getting into a car accident and having some type of spontaneous injury based off of constructive or deconstructive forces. The healing still follows in the repair sequence go because our biological repair is the same as if we are resolving from a biological conflict or a necessary, meaningful biological adaptation. It's just that we aren't involved in it. It's just a natural program that happens. It's just like drinking water, swallowing water, and it comes out through your digestive tract. Right? It's a natural innate system. What I do want to talk about though is conflict injury. So spontaneous injury, pretty easy to understand, but conflict injury. This is when a tissue is already weakened, specifically by a conflict shock, by a biological necessary or biological meaningful special program that our body is running for our survival. This is when maybe an area is vulnerable or already inflamed because it's in that healing cycle and we are continuing to perpetuate that cycle, preventing ourselves from healing. A lot of us write these things off as, oh, well, it was just a spontaneous injury. And this is where we gain back our confidence, remove the fear, and have awareness and take responsibility for the conflicts we've endured in life. And so this can actually create a lot more pain, a lot more issues, a lot more symptoms when we have a conflict injury because our body is trying to tell us more than just, hey, you stubbed your toe today or sloughed your skin off your toe and we're healing. Like, yes, that is painful, but when it's wrapped in and wired into the biology of we've been trying to tell you something, and now you are at a catastrophic breakdown. How loud do we have to yell at you to get you to drive the wheel again? So this injury does originate from a biological program, not just mechanics, but that doesn't mean it doesn't include mechanics because we are a mechanistic system. So we're going to look at these nuances today. Like I said, spontaneous injury, rolling your ankle, tripping, falling, lifting something unexpectedly, which, this can get a little bit gray sometimes. Like if we lift it improperly and we're just lifting it and we are improper, but we're still strong, that might be spontaneous injury. But what happens if we're running a self-evaluation program, our bones are weak because we don't have enough calcium, because we're running the self-evaluation, we don't have enough minerals, and then we also have a spontaneous injury. See how it can get a little bit nuanced? And then there's also the sudden twist or impact, which we're going to really talk about here, because most of the time, yes, shearing forces in physics are a whole thing. I am a chiropractor. I did have to take a lot of physics classes in terms of quantum biomechanics of the body, spinal biodynamics of the body. Yes, shearing forces are a thing. If you completely get your spine sheared in a car accident, that's a spontaneous injury. However, you were running some self-evaluation, that may also include spontaneous injury and a component of intensity coming from an area that was already weak and vulnerable, adding to a spontaneous injury. So we have to start being honest and truthful with ourselves with these things and seeing how our body is relating. Conflict injury areas can be weakened by long-term self-evaluation. That's primarily in terms of bone or muscle or any type of skeletal component is what we're going to be talking about as self-evaluation because that is the number one program that impacts those areas. Then we have chronic stress, and this is like we talked about last week if we tuned in, that chronic healing loop where you're in healing and then you're back in conflict activity again. Hello, I'm back. And then you're back in healing. Hello, welcome back. Oh, I'm back in conflict activity. And you just keep going back and forth and back and forth. This is repeated tracks. This is when we have the awareness, but we aren't choosing the choice consistently into staying in that healing cycle. And this is how tissue is originally in that repair system. Tissues just get wrapped up in that conflict injury and they constantly go back and forth. And yes, there can be small movements again that equal big reactions in this. So it's like, imagine if you had something already going on and then you added more amplification to it. Most of the time, conflict injuries without spontaneous injury on top of it, or just multiple compounded conflict injuries, tend to make small movements really big, painful things because our body's not just saying, hey, I injured this. It's like, I've been injured for 10 years and now, now it's finally screaming. And so we wonder why we have these big presentations of symptoms when it's like, well, I never noticed this. And that's when we have to start having this awareness. And so because the tissue, again, is already in a biological program, it's not going to be in a stable state. So I left this in here from last week actually because it's a great example as if we are going through a conflict and we're in that conflict active phase and then we go into healing. This is where we notice the symptoms in that healing in one straight swoop. If we followed biological healing without the interruptions that we put in as modern day humans, we would just go conflict activity, resolution, healing phase one, healing phase two, back to normal, no issue. In the sense of biological healing or spontaneous injury, our true biology, how it heals is very similar. You had an injury, you go straight into healing. There's nothing else. Like it's just bang, bang, boom. But what happens, and can happen in both, is if we are have a spontaneous injury and it creates its own conflict, because majority of the time, some of those spontaneous injuries do create a conflict. I think I would say, in my personal opinion, um, probably a majority of them, honestly, because it's a shock to you, right? Like it may have not stemmed from it, but it does create a situation that there is a conflict. And then you could be in this hanging healing loop. Like your body was just going to go from conflict activity to healing, and now it's just in this perpetuated cycle. All right, let's move in. Step one. So I wanted to call this phase one, but I didn't want to confuse anybody according to the biological laws. So we're going to talk about step one. Step one being the moment of injury. So when we are injuring, whether it's spontaneous or it's conflict driven, our biology activates itself. It activates itself by muscle guarding, nerve sensitivity, potentially circulation shifts, immediate inflammation, because that's the biological code. That is how we are wired. So when something happens, the response is protective and intelligent. And this may seem like I'm stating the obvious, and you're gonna be like, Dr. Kayla, this is pretty obvious. But your body sometimes isn't aware of this because we automatically think, oh my gosh, I did this. My leg is swelling. I need to get the swelling down. I need to like put something on this because it's looking ugly. And so I just want you to reflect on what your response mode is when you go into injury, and could it potentially require some tending to? Or a shift of some sort, because we have to think about this as a practical situation. If you're in a car accident and someone calls 911, that's an immediate response. And someone's not going to be like, "Oh my God, the police are coming, the police are coming." It's that's the proper first responder to be there. So if the proper first responder after a car accident is to call 911, they trigger the police and then the ambulance if someone's injured and needs help. That's exactly what happens in the moment of injury for your body. Regardless of what type of injury, there's going to be a response. So this happens when there's an actual conflict, a biological conflict, or if it's just spontaneous injury. Now, step two, I say all of that because this leads and sets the scene for the inflammation aspect. So inflammation is repair. Inflammation is repair. Inflammation is repair. We've been all programmed that inflammation is so horrible, and if you have a spontaneous injury, you need to wrap it tight, squeeze the inflammation out, do all of these things. What if inflammation was the vehicle that brought blood, nutrients, stem cells, that repair activity, and aided in the cleanup and the rebuilding system? It's a process. Inflammation is a process, everyone. It's not a pathology. It's a process. It's a necessary process. And so this is acute inflammation. Now, if we go back all the way up to here and we look at here, even if we had a conflict injury, right? So this is a conflicting injury where, say, we had cell loss in a situation and we were in that conflict active phase, and then we went into resolution. Edema is a necessary component of the A phase of healing. Once resolution happens, there's two phases of healing. There's the yucky phase where you have symptoms, exudate, which is water most of the time. You can sometimes some blood that comes in pools. You have edema, you have heat. Those are necessary components. And so when we're talking about inflammation, this is biological, right? And so then we have looking at what inflammation does in terms of its vehicle, we could call it a biological cast. It is actually stabilizing the area for us. It is preventing overuse, and it actually protects us during repair. You know, the biggest thing I see in chronic injury is people want to get back to their regular activities of daily living so quickly. So they take anti-inflammatories and they wrap it as tight as can be and they squeeze it out like a empty tube of toothpaste. And then we wonder why it's taking forever to heal. I have a very personal experience with this. I had a Liz Frank injury for all of my medical friends when I was 27 weeks pregnant with my daughter. And I literally couldn't do anything. Literally couldn't do anything. Couldn't have the surgery. Well, I chose not to have the surgery. They would have done the surgery. I mean, I chose not to have the surgery. And so what did I do? I allowed inflammation to do its job. I was very thankful for inflammation because I was very large in my third trimester of pregnancy, and I was not able to move. And so I let it rest and I watched it swell. It was like, woo, it was huge, and blood pooled, and I had bruising, and it's a traditional Liz Frank injury. Although I was extra lucky because I wasn't a prime equestrian athlete or an NFL football player, which are the two common ways to have a Liz Frank injury. I just had my dogs run into me and twist my leg around backwards in my backyard. So you know what? I had a Liz Frank injury from a very interesting experience, but I was very grateful for inflammation because it actually helped my body secure the site for rebuilding. So I want you to simmer on that experience if you've had some type of fear or unsettledness, or like my body is, I mean, my foot looked like it was misshapen. I mean, like, and I didn't have any massive, I mean, I had broken bones, four different fractures, but it wasn't like I had my foot twisted backwards, but it looked like it in terms of inflammation, right? Inflammation can sometimes look really scary. What about people when they have a response to some type of conflict that has like a food track in it, like their face just gets huge, right? It doesn't even, we don't even look human when sometimes inflammation takes over, but its job is purposeful. It is doing a necessary part of that process. And so, of course, step three would be moving into that healing phase. And so, let's just talk about what delays healing, because we could talk for hours about what happens during healing. We're pretty certain we know symptoms come. We know there's exudate, there's water, there's heat that has to happen, and of course, inflammation. But what could delay this? So, if our goal here is safety, repair, and release, right? When we're talking about a conflict-based injury, we want to understand what can sometimes inhibit that or be a factor in shifting that from being timely to maybe a little less timely on our own desired timeline. And it's not age, it's not genetics, it's not this idea that, just because someone's younger, they'll heal faster, because sometimes that's not entirely true, depending on what the conflict is and what we are consciously and subconsciously believing or fearing in our experience. So commonly delays occur when stress remains high. And then everybody's like, everybody's stressed these days, right? Like everybody has stress. I have this stress, this stress. No, what I'm talking about is, in my experience, I wasn't able to walk and I was about to have a baby. Like, how does that work, right? Or someone who gets injured and has to figure out a way to provide financially for their family. That's a stress. That's a high stress, right? Someone maybe gets a injury and then has to figure out childcare, right? Or has to figure out how to clean their house, right? If they're the one who is the house manager and runs the house and does all those things. Like there's a lot of stress that comes with injury that we don't often think about when people aren't healing. Resources would be the number one thing, in terms of money, in terms of healing resources, in terms of understanding what our body's actually doing, which is why it seems remediatory. But the step one and step two, I think, really shift people's perspective when they understand what's necessary in that experience. The body stays in conflict active state. Yeah, if we are experiencing a conflict active injury or conflict-based injury, and we are staying in that conflict active state because we're not allowing our body to resolve, this is your typical disc injury, everyone. As a chiropractor, this is my specialty. Disc injuries, right? Everybody thinks, oh, well, I just bent over to pick up the stick in my backyard. It must, I don't know, maybe my bones are weak. Like, no, we can't blame tissues. We can't blame sticks. We can't blame, oh, it's that time of year I ate horrible food. Self-devaluation is a long-running program that most of us experience. And it is hard to resolve because we live in a very modern-based world where we're constantly having self-devaluation conflicts, especially in the world if we look at as a feminine aspect in the way of how we look at ourselves, define ourselves, treat other people, speak about them, in the male-dominated world in terms of we aren't very much manual laborers anymore. We are desk people. And there comes a lot of high stress with that, and a lot of conflicts that occur in terms of men trying to be protective, hierarchical, hunter-gatherers in a desk office setting that creates not the best masculine situation and can create a lot of self-devaluation for them. We talked about that last week. And so, what happens if the load is too heavy and we're carrying it and it's an impacting self-devaluation in our cervical spine? That's when we have cervical disc issues. If it is something that we aren't able to carry in terms of a weight load sense. It's like there's so much on my back. There's so much that I just have to handle every day, and I don't get my emotions out, and I'm not able to process, and I'm not able to have communication or community. That's a low back injury, right? That happens a lot in the manual labor experiences because we are taxing our body, yes, but that taxing comes at a price or a cost of not being with our families, not because we have to work more hours to make ends meet in order to be able to provide in those fields, right? And so this creates that constant conflict loop like we talked about last week. It all boils down to the same predictable patterns, just how are you in your life expressing them? Then we can look at tracks re-triggering the injury. This would be your ideal. I work on Wall Street. I work on Wall Street. There's a high stress there. I'm constantly self-devaluating myself and I have low back pain. And I just think it's because I stand at a computer all day and look at stocks and do all kinds of trading. And then I go and I have experiences playing sport or going out and doing all these things. And then on the weekends, I start to have more pain because I go into resolution. And the idea would be to fully resolve that. But who that works on Wall Street and makes that great money is going to give that up to be able to rest? No, they're going to go right back into that office on Monday and repeat that conflict re-triggering cycle. That's a track. It's a stressor. It's a part of the program that is a huge, big red flag, if you will. And if we keep pressing that red flag, it's not going to allow healing to ensue. You move too much too soon. You push the inflammation out. You don't allow the body to move through the biological phases of healing, whether spontaneous injury or conflict injury based, it's not going to actually repair. And then the last one, the nervous system doesn't shift into repair mode. But if you know, I put this in there as a test because our nervous system will not shift into repair mode unless you're in resolution if it's a conflict-based injury. And even if it's a spontaneous injury and your body's in this fight or flight because you're shunting blood to the area of injury, you're shunting inflammation and these repair helpers, I call them little repair soldiers. They're going to the site to repair them. If we're constantly worrying and we add on stress of, well, I have to go back to work tomorrow. I don't know how I'm going to walk on this foot. How am I going to provide for my family? Oh my gosh, I was supposed to have this experience tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. Oh my gosh, what are they going to think about me? See this constant spiral? All of that impacts our physiology. And The biggest thing I want you to take from this is healing requires safety signals. So, safety being inherent safety, not like, oh, I know I'm not going to get run over by a car right now. Of course, that is unspoken. Like, we don't want you in danger ever. But what is your internal self saying? Is your internal self on high red alert? Next, let's talk about, and this is the last topic that I really want to dive into because I get a lot of questions about this. And so, surgery. A woman last week asked this question on our chronic healing call, and I had a lot of emails actually as well afterwards with same individual or similar individuals asking similar questions. And so, this is not a suggestion of what to do. This is an invitation for you to have a personal reflection, a personal awareness, accountability, and opportunity to choose which way you are going to gather your information, make a choice, not based in fear. Because this is what we're looking at the five biological laws. The five biological laws tell us that we don't have to fear our body, right? Because it's predictable. We know if it's running a program, we know what that resolution looks like. We may need procedural help in an emergency setting, depending on our level of adaptability. We know that when something happens, we have the opportunity and the gift of having access to resources in allopathic medicine, in Eastern medicine, in holistic medicine, and beyond. And so, the idea of surgery, I want to start with this. When you heal biologically, you follow this pathway right here. That means your body goes through this cascade uninterrupted. We talked a couple weeks ago, if you add drugs, if you add procedures, if you add all these things, you're constantly putting yourself back in conflict activity and having to heal out of that. So when we're talking about surgery, we can heal biologically by saying what I just said and moving through that cascade, or we can choose to heal non-biologically. Is there anything wrong with healing non-biologically? No, it's just simply choosing to heal without the biological cascade moving through. An example of this would be I find that I have a tumor. A tumor, I'm not going to go into this, but a tumor is an encapsulation of a resolution that doesn't have the proper microbes to break down that tumor. So the body's intelligent. It walls it off until it has the proper microbes. Typically, it's going to be gram-positive, gram-negative bacteria that's going to come in and eat away that tumor. But most of us don't have those microbes. And so we have a tumor, it walls itself off, it's intelligent in that area. And sometimes it is necessary or warranted or easier, let's be real, easier and convenient to have a surgical procedure to remove the tumor. Now, if I remove the tumor and I don't resolve the conflict, do you know what's going to happen? The tumor's going to come back because your body's going to have to resolve it again because it resolved it and it was waiting in order to fully resolve that cycle. The full resolution would be you get the bacteria eats that tissue away, and the body goes, hey, I fixed it. Full resolution biologically. Now, let's say you resolve the conflict and just didn't have the bacteria, and then you cut the tumor out and you never have it again. That's a resolution of non-biological healing because you just took it out. You resolved the conflict, you took it out. Easy peasy. I've had procedures like that. Now, when we're talking about something in terms of surgery for, let's say, self-evaluation, this is where it can get, let's say, a little bit dicey because surgery is not biological healing. Surgery is not a biological way to heal. It's a mechanical intervention. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't be having surgeries. Don't get me wrong. I've had a lot of them in my day. I'm saying it's your choice to look at this with the best choice that you feel is necessary for your goals and for your perspective. But whatever you choose, having awareness and moving out of fear and making a conscious choice is the best direction. So, if we're choosing to have a surgery, but your body is still responding to the biological aspect that the trauma created, this actually creates another conflict. Majority of the time, surgeries create more conflicts. And that's because the body's already in a survival mode, and now we are adding another layer. So when I think about surgery, I think of it as a controlled injury, right? Because we're going in for a procedure. Most of us have been feared of white coat, that hospitals are dangerous, places that people die. Like, even if you don't actually believe those things, it's programmed in our systems because It's on TV. It's in movies. We've been predictably programmed to believe this. So, any type of a forced removal or a correction, a mechanistic alteration of tissue, or a non-biological interruption or reset of a program is what I typically see in the surgical world. And so the fact that you're aware of this now is going to add more ease. And this is why we talk about biological truths, not just covering things up because it's easy for you to digest. So if we're looking at when we're having surgery, your body's going to interpret this surgery as a brand new shock to the tissue. Think about it. If you were in a conflict-based injury, and now you are going in for a procedure to fix something. Majority of the time, it is a brand new shock because you're gonna have to restart the repair of that sequence. You are interrupting the biological sequence of healing. Again, it might be necessary, it might be warranted. You might come out far better. That's for you to decide. It's a temporary need to protect, to swell and inflame. It's a temporary shutdown of normal function, right? And it's a survival level priority. And so this is where your own psyche, your own individuality comes into play. Surgery can bypass nature's built-in repair timeline, which also requires a reopening of healing phases. It reorganizes tissue from scratch, right? So now we aren't just growing tissue. Sometimes we're getting skin grafts. Sometimes we're adding in hardware into, biological tissue. Sometimes we are impacting the collagen that's already trying to be rebuilt, but now we're having to rebuild collagen more aggressively because we've had interruption. We are adding other things into the mix, such as detoxing or having anesthesia, which you do need a detox from, or medications. And if you were here for the first two slides, what is the three things that our body biologically does not adapt to? Toxicity, in terms of chemical overload. So do you see how stacking these things, again, there's nothing wrong with making these choices. I've had handfuls of surgeries and procedures. It's all up to our conscious choice, and it's through our own biological lens. And so when you understand this, you are not making a fear-based decision. And that is my entire purpose of educating people this way, because people who make less fearful decisions actually reduce the amount of conflict that they experience. Because when you go in knowing what our physiology does, you are living through a lens that is not rooted in fear. It's rooted in trust and understanding, and therefore you lessen the intensity or the opportunity for your body to even experience a shock because you're coming in with a different set of preparedness. So when we have a surgery, this is why post-operative swelling can actually be more intense because of these things that we just talked about. Because you're reopening a healing phase. You're interrupting tissues that already had their own order and their own organizational pattern. You're potentially adding some other things in, which is why pain can rapidly increase and spike a lot more than if you have the opportunity to heal biologically versus non-biologically. This may cause exhaustion because now you added more stress, biological stress, to a body that was already in a stressful survival state. This is when you can have old symptoms or even new ones that start to appear. New ones would come from new conflicts that you're now in resolution of. This may be old symptoms because you stepped on a lot of tracks of other symptoms that connected to other programs that you weren't really having symptoms or active conflict cycles with, but now you did because you returned to that conflict experience. This is why people in chronic healing loops who constantly are going in and out of doctors' offices, in and out of hospital systems, why they're constantly having more and more and more and more chronic problems. We talked about that last week because those are conflicts. Because you fear that you're going to get another diagnosis. You fear that things aren't going to be the way you want them to be. And you're taking your trust and your sacred sovereignty and moving it to an outside external person and letting that decision be impacted from the outside versus having an understanding on the inside and allowing that to ripple through conversation and connection instead of feeling like in this authoritative experience. So healing often happens in waves, not straight lines, especially in surgical procedures because there's several layers versus I'm just going in to fix this X, Y, and Z. Surgery doesn't heal. Your body heals. And that's the biggest thing I have shared with so many individuals. Again, I've had surgeries, but they weren't for me. They weren't for me to heal. They were for me to have peace of mind, to have a repair, so my body can be repaired and go back into healing. And I think that's really powerful if we shift our perspective on that. So I want to share something today. And I talk about this every single week, but I changed this up a little bit because I've seen some pretty extensive wounds, injuries, whether they are spontaneous injuries like mine was, or which was wrapped in endless self-evaluation after that injury of conflict injuries. Um, what happens when we shift not just our perspective on how our biology actually adapts, but we add more vital energy? Because I've talked about this stress, right? So if we have this stress and stress impacts us in a certain way, and it's not allowing us to have more sovereign freedom and ease in our life or in our nervous system. What if we were able to add vital life force energy and have more abundance of resources, even if we were still in a fearful state? I call it having more space. And so I want to share something with you tonight. It's this little fancy patch that you could see here. This is light technology. So I said at the very beginning, my intention here is always for you to talk and reflect on self-healing, going back to basics of our light, frequency, sound, our energetic codes of who we are as human beings. And vital life force energy is the essential component of that. Light does not override our biology. It only amplifies it because we communicate via light. And so if we utilize light technology, we are not treating anything. We are optimizing and amplifying what our body's already doing. So how does this work? Adding this opportunity for your body to reflect its own light back inside via non-transdermal wearable light reflective patches. They allow specific wavelengths of light into your body. You can see because of the filter. There it is. So that your body can promote its own biological variants, create its own resources from scratch so that your body can reduce stress, so it could have a better vital energy, so it could actually repair and heal how your body's already intending to, just with more abundance. So you take this patch, you have light signaling, and you allow your nervous system to be supported via its own amplified light and vital source energy. Therefore, it has more space to find resolution, it has more clarity, it has more communication with ease, and therefore it has a better opportunity and chance to return to homeostasis or true restoration and resolution. So this patch right here, super, super simple, easy, safe, and effective. There's no ingredients in this patch. It is simply organic crystal molecules. It has stabilized water, stabilized oxygen. It's non-transdermal. Nothing's going into the skin. It's reflecting the light in your body, reflecting that light back inside so your body can utilize it to optimize its own potential. There is no contraindications. I don't care what medication you're on. There's no ingredients in it. Nothing's going into the skin, no side effects, and it is patented over almost 200 patents now in the LifeWave suite. This is a company over 21 years old. This patch right here and 10 other patches were created, specifically started for the Navy SEALs to help protect their long-term longevity, health, and vitality for their intensive job. And so this is exactly what we all deserve and need to optimize our own vital energy resources. So I changed it up and I just want to talk about X39 tonight because when we're talking about injury, we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about wound healing, we're talking about any type of conflict that we're going on in our body, we're talking about our body's stem cells. And so our body stem cells are essential for our repair. And there's this copper peptide in our body. GHK copper peptide. It is essential in the repair process of so many things that you could see on the screen right now. And so if you're in a repair phase of any type, you're going to require GHK copper peptide. This patch reflects your own light back inside of your body, and by utilizing that light, it helps activate this copper peptide. Your own light activates this copper peptide, and therefore an abundance of this copper peptide, GHK copper peptide, according to medical research, stem cell research, activates stem cells. GHK copper peptide activates your stem cells, repairs, allows you to create an abundance of them that go to areas of your body that you need and desire more healing support. So why wouldn't you start this? No matter what you're repairing in your body, but specifically if you're having hanging healings, spontaneous injury, conflict injury, hanging loops of healing. This is where we start because stem cells are essential to healing. And the older you get, the less stem cells you have. So, what if you could have more by just optimizing them and creating them via your own light activation? So, let's talk about how we choose this shift. We know there are some things that we can also benefit from, right? It's just not a one size fits all. Excuse me. So we can benefit from gentle movement, right? Motion is lotion. Our body, excuse me, I'm still in PCLB resolution from last week. Much better though. Um, we know that gentle motion, movement, allowing your lymphatic system to move, getting your bones moving, allowing the synovial fluid in your joints to move, that's essential, right? Motion is lotion. It keeps us healthy and strong. Hydration and minerals. I talk about this literally every single week. I'm going to stop boring you with it. But high quality water, we are water and salt beings. High quality minerals, high quality water, always. Sleep and rest. Hello, sleep and rest is number three, but it's like we have to have rest if we want to actually heal. Lymphatic activation, stress reduction, and then consistent patching. Wearing this little guy every single day for at least 365 days is going to drastically shift the conditions that your body is naturally already repairing and optimizing your vitality via this little patch. So, leaving it up to you and giving you the invitation to choose that shift, your body knows exactly what it's doing. Yes? Truth? I think so. Healing is predictable. We've learned this. We know the five biological laws tell us that healing is predictable. We tell us that healing is intelligent. It's not something that comes from outside of us because if I have a spontaneous injury, such as I cut my finger, such as I break my foot, such as I break a bone, it will heal. You don't have to constantly wake up and remind yourself or your body to do so. It will heal. Sometimes it requires rest. Sometimes it requires increased mineral support, right? Because those are ingredients in that equation. But overall, we know that healing follows a biological sequence every single time. And if you don't know, go watch the other 8 episodes, and I promise and trust you'll know by then. So I invite everybody. Two things. If you want to learn more that we're diving in, I do offer a 5-week, easy at your own pace, pre-recorded course, lots of resources for you to go through. It is the German New Medicine course. If you want that information, feel free to reach out to me on social media. Email me at hello@drkaylaabide.love and I will get you that link so you could tune in. You could also find it on my website, which you could find drkabide.com. And then if you've heard about this fancy little X39 patch and that's why you're here today and someone invited you here, go back and tell them all the fancy things that you learned and tell them that you want to get started with this patch and get it to your doorstep in 2 to 3 days. If you're here by just divine intervention on here on the replay or watching now, I invited you here. You don't have anyone. You just stumbled upon this by fate and divine intervention, then I would love to help you. So send me an email, reach out to me. I would love to get more information about that. All in all, you run the show. You could choose the shift. You could shift into any choice that you choose in terms of your healing. You just have to ask for help. And now, not just asking for help, but asking for questions is what we get to spend a few moments on. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, unmute yourself. I'm going to cut off the recording so we don't include the questions.